For more, we are joined by Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Behnam Ben Taleblu. Welcome, sir.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Now, we know Israeli Defense Forces, they're pulling back from the Gaza Strip as Trump sends, around 200 U.S. troops to the region to monitor this historic peace deal. My question to you is, beyond the hostage deal, do you think the terms of this deal, are they going to stick? Are they going to hold long term?
Well, it's an important question because it's not just about getting the hostages back, but it's about making sure that peace is able to be really locked in the region. And right now, that's $1 million question. And that's actually, I think, why the president is going not just to go to Israel to meet with the senior policymakers, but actually to go to Egypt, to that Sharm el-Sheikh conference that you mentioned, because this is critical to getting the rest of the regional buy-in to keep the pressure on Hamas to move towards things like disarmament, which is going to be key to get a civilian government or some kind of civilian leadership in Gaza, but also to make sure that, the threats that used to exist in Gaza don't, resurface and force Israel to have to go back in again and again and again.
Absolutely. And you just mentioned as well, the disarmament of Hamas. This is something that they haven't necessarily properly agreed to. It's still a little bit vague. And once that happens, as you mentioned, there needs to be a team that's going to run Gaza. How much do you think the PLO how much influence do you think they will have in Gaza after this all happens?
Well, as you know, there is something of a civil war between Hamas and the PLO, but at the same time, throughout the entirety of the, multiple rounds of violence that we've seen emanate out of Gaza, Europe, for example, and the United Nations have been large backers of the idea of having the PA as part of really any governing or political entity in post-war Gaza, let alone in post-Hamas Gaza. Now, obviously, they're not the ones who came up with this very interesting 20-point peace plan. So a lot will still depend on how much pressure Washington brings to bear and really what Washington is able to do with its Arab partners in the region to push for either segmented or full civilian control in post-Hamas Gaza. But I think, these are the tough questions that are going to have to be hashed out at the Sharm el-Sheikh conference. And again, the fact that the president is going, the fact that the president is going to be continuing to keep this issue in the bright lights post, hopefully, the next 48 hours post the hostages being returned, is proof positive that, Washington actually does care about achieving the full 20 points and not just the first few.
Yeah, now we know this is really a regional, issue because this deal doesn't just impact Israel and Hamas, but countries like Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, and Iraq. They've long been involved in this conflict. How does the Trump peace plan impact this unrest for the entire region? How will it be impacted ultimately?
Well, you can slice and dice this question several ways. The first is that, of course, you had lots of countries trying to, you could say, lodge their bilateral issues or their bilateral wants and needs and asks of Washington into the push for peace and the push to get Hamas to return the hostages back. Here, I'm thinking about Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar. Beyond that, of course, there's the million-dollar question of can you even get an Abraham Accords 2.0 after you do get peace, or if you are able to get peace in Gaza. Certainly, that's going to be involving Saudi Arabia. But the real long-run question for peace in the Middle East is not how does America handle its partners in the region, but its adversaries in the region. And so long as you have governments like the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the arsonist of many of the fires in the region and has long supported Hamas, continuing to do the things it does and sponsor the kind of terror that it does, you're going to have the U.S. be sucked back into cycle of violence after cycle of violence in this region. Because those guys have an ideology, and they say that ideology clearly, and that is death to America and death to Israel.
Yeah, let's talk more about Iran's influence, actually, because they really are the head of the octopus. And the IDF has done a fantastic job basically knocking out each one of those arms as we've gone through the past 2 years, particularly Hezbollah, who have been very, very quiet recently.
Good point.
And as we go through these new 2.0, expect maybe the hope for a 2.0 of the Abraham Accords. Where do you see this going with Lebanon? Could they be next?
Well, there's questions of, deconfliction agreements between Syria and Israel potentially moving into some sort, of, I don't want to use the word peace yet, but into some sort of larger normalization is probably a better word. But that's going to be factoring over, be based entirely on the fate of what's going to be happening with the Golan Heights. But with Lebanon, you see the Israelis, rather confident of the way things are, which is that they have a relatively free hand militarily. You have large swaths of the society pushing back against Hezbollah. But the real question is, how does the axis of resistance, and that's this constellation of Iran-backed terror groups, chief of which is Hezbollah in Lebanon, how do these guys actually exploit the sense of victory that Israel and Washington have at the moment? Because my fear is that in the medium to long term, the sense of victory that America and Israel have in the region would lead us to push away. And that's exactly how Iran's transnational terrorist apparatus, again, chief of them, Hezbollah, that's exactly the kind of time and space they want to rebuild. They want to foster a sense of victory so that everyone leans out rather than leaning in, and then they can kind of emerge again in the darkness, kind of like a mushroom.
Yeah, beautifully said. Really appreciate your insight on this. Behnam Ben Taleblu, you've been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Appreciate it.